Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Von Manor, where Roger and I have returned to talk about Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze. We're talking about the Man of Bronze today. I mentioned recently, when I was talking about my 2025 plans, that one of the things I planned on doing is to read Doc Savage, one of my very favorite pulp heroes of all time. Doc Savage was probably the first real superhero, actually. There are a lot of precursors to superheroes. You know, there was the Scarlet Pimpernel, then there was Zorro, there was the Phantom in the comic strips, the Shadow, and then Doc Savage. And Doc Savage had so many elements of the classic superhero that he kind of is the first superhero, only he wasn't in the comic books. He was in the Pulp magazine starting in 1933. Fantastic character. And he lasted a while. I think he was in the Pulps until 1949. I think it was probably the winter of 49, if I'm remembering right. And I might be remembering wrong. You never know. But he was published for a while before he vanished until the 1960s when he returned in paperback. His entire series of stories, they were all reprinted in paperback with great cover art, and it was a huge success. It was a great success, that reprint line of those old pulp magazines. And he's a great character, Doc Savage, who was basically raised to be a superhero. His dad was a little screwy, Doc Savage's father was, and decided to raise his son to be the ultimate physical and mental marvel. So he was trained since infancy to be, basically as close to Superman as you can get and still be mortal. And so he is a tremendous influence on superheroes. His name was Clark Savage Jr. and an obvious inspiration for Superman in a lot of ways, but also Batman. He's a big influence on Batman because he was a guy who trained himself to physical and mental perfection, which is basically what Batman did. Only Batman decided to do it himself. He didn't have a crazy dad that made him do it. Great character, and I decided, you know what? I love pulp. I love the pulp adventure characters, the pulp heroes, and I never read as much of that stuff as I really would like to. So I'm committing myself to read one Doc Savage adventure a month, starting in January. And I'll just continue that through the years, Roger. I'll just keep going forever. Or at least until the Doc Savage adventures run out. Although there were some new novels that were published over the last few years, some newer Doc Savage novels. So I'll end up reading those too, I'm sure. But we're talking about the Doc Savage I'm going to be reading in 2025. And I decided that I am going to read these stories, these Doc Savage adventures, in the order that they were originally published in the pulp magazines. That seems to make the most sense to me, although they've never been reprinted that way, as far as I know. Certainly the Bantam paperbacks skipped all over the place. They started off with the first adventure, you kind of have to, but they skipped all over the place after that. And certainly my own reading of Doc Savage has been like that. I would just read them as I found them. And you can read them that way. They're all self-contained adventures. But I think I'll get more out of it if I read them in the actual publication order, because I love to do that kind of thing anyway. And the first one was this one. This is Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze. This is basically Doc Savage's origin story, or the closest you're going to get to a Doc Savage origin story. This is the novel where you first meet Doc Savage, you learn all about him, and you learn about his crew. He has a crew of agents who are all specialists in their fields. Now, Doc Savage basically knows everything, so he knows everything that his specialist pals know, but it's fun to have them around. And they do prove to be very helpful now and again. So we learn all about all of these characters in this first novel, The Man of Bronze. And this is the cover that was created by James Bama. And the model for this character was Steve Holland. Had to get that right. Who was a quite popular model for paperbacks. He modeled for a lot of westerns, but this Doc Savage image by James Bama was so powerful that it completely transformed everybody's idea of what this character looked like, with the widow's peak and the torn up shirt. After this image was published, this forever is Doc Savage in all of our minds. Now, he didn't exactly look like that when he first showed up. I also had this novel here, and you get a better look at the cover here. But if you look on the back, you'll see Doc Savage looked very different in his original magazine adventures. This is the first issue here of Doc Savage. And you'll see he's more of a regular looking guy, although he is described in the magazine itself as being kind of superhuman. And so he's described as being more of a giant, more like this guy. So I should mention that I'll interject and interrupt my own video. Doc Savage is described in the books as being a bronze giant, but he's also described as being exactly 6 feet tall, which isn't exactly a giant, though he did grow an extra 2 inches by another few years later. I guess he just wasn't tall enough, so they made him taller. But yeah, not exactly a giant. And let's see if I could if you look at pictures of Doc, he's just a guy in the book. But just a guy. But yeah, this is Doc. And most of the stories, not all of them, but most of them were written by Lester Dent. And this edition has some pictures of Lester Dent. There's the adventurous Lester Dent there. He is an interesting character right there. And I promised a million years ago to do a video on Lester Dent, and I still haven't done it. I need to do that video. But yeah, Man of Bronze is the first story. And that was originally published in March of 1933. And then in April of 1933, we got Land of Terror, which was published here by Bantam. And of course, if you have a Land of Terror, you have to have dinosaurs in it. Now on the back here, you also get a little picture that has some of Doc Savage's agents there. So that's kind of cool. So when Land of Terror was published in the Pulp magazines, it was published in April of 1933, the second Doc Savage adventure. But here, in this series, it was published as number 8. Inexplicably, it became number 8. Why? Who knows? But it's really number 2. So, The Land of Terror is the second adventure that I'll be reading, which is also in this. These reprints from Nostalgia Ventures had 2 Doc Savage adventures in them. And they were really cool because they also reprinted all of the original art from the pulps, which of course the paperbacks did not do, with a bunch of other interesting stuff thrown in. I don't have a lot of these. I have a lot more of these. But when I do have these, I will probably read these because they're just extra cool. So those are the first 2. And then in May of 1933, the third adventure came out, which was Quest of the Spider. There's Doc Savage there with his torn up shirt. He always had the torn up shirt. When I first discovered Doc Savage as a little kid, I would see these books lying around, and I just never could figure out why this guy just didn't change his shirt. You know, I couldn't figure it out. I tell you the truth, I still can't figure it out, Roger. But yes, Doc Savage, The Quest of the Spider, is the third adventure, which came out in May of 33. And then we got The Polar Treasure. The Polar Treasure, which came out in June of 33. And we have a very, very, very large polar bear there, menacing Doc Savage. This is number what? Number 4. It's number 4. So this is actually the correct number. How odd. This one was number 68. The third adventure was number 68. But then they're jumping back to the correct numbering, and we have number 4. Who knows why? Who knows why? So that was the Polar Treasure. Then in July of 33, we got The Pirate of the Pacific. The Pirate of the Pacific. And that's pretty cool. Pretty cool cover there. We also have both of those adventures in this issue here, which shows the original Pulp magazine cover from the Nostalgia Adventures reprint. So as you can see, Doc Savage, he's a little scrawnier, a handsome fella. He looks kind of like a movie star, but he's not like this guy. He's not like that guy. And then in August of 33, we got the Red Skull. Now, if you're like me and you hear Red Skull, all you could think of is Captain America. But this is not that. This is the Red Skull from Doc Savage. So we have the Red Skull, and that was followed by a paperback that I have that's really tattered, and that's The Lost Oasis. The Lost Oasis from September of 1933, which you could barely see because the Oasis is, well, it's just that lost. It's just that lost. This was reprinted as number 6, whereas in fact it's number 7. What was the Red Skull was reprinted as number 17. Who knows? I think I've got the Lost Oasis over here as well. This is the original pulp cover for the Lost Oasis. And this also has the Sargasso Ogre. The Sargasso Ogre, which is a pulp adventure, or Doc Savage pulp adventure that I do not have in a Bantam. I don't have one of these for Sargasso Ogre. The only way I have it is in this Nostalgia Adventures reprint. So at least I have this. I have most of Doc Savage adventures in one form or another, but I am missing some from the later years. But the early stuff, I seem to have everything in one way or another. But this is the only way I have the Sargasso Ogre. This was the original pulp cover for the Sargasso Ogre there. Naked Doc Savage swimming through the water. He's naked. So yeah, those are those two. And then in November of 33, we had The Czar of Fear, which was published as number 22 in the Bantam series. Now I have this as a double. They printed some Doc Savage double features. And this is printed along with The Fortress of Solitude. Because Doc Savage had a Fortress of Solitude from before Superman had a Fortress of Solitude. Superman actually stole his Fortress of Solitude from Doc Savage. That seems pretty sneaky and underhanded for a superhero like Superman to do, but he did. This comic books, man, they ripped a lot off from the pulp characters, including the Fortress of Solitude. But the one I'm going to be reading is this one, The Czar of Fear. Because that's the one that came out in November of 33. And then in December of 33, we got The Phantom City. It's The Phantom City, which is number 10, and that is number 10 as it was originally published. So inexplicably, this one is actually in proper order. The Phantom City. They did that one right. And then in January of 1934, we got one that looks really pretty cool, and that's The Brand of the Werewolf. Now, I've never read this particular novel, so I don't know if this features a real werewolf that Doc Savage is fighting. I'm assuming it's some kind of science fiction version of a werewolf, as opposed to a supernatural werewolf, but that's fine. As long as we get a werewolf, I'll be happy. This was actually published as number 5, when in fact it is number 11. But yeah, The Brand of the Werewolf. Then I'll be closing out in December with the book that came out in February of 1934, and that is The Man Who Shook the Earth. The Man Who Shook the Earth. Which was, in this series, published as book number 43. They just skipped all over the place, these Doc Savage adventures. And like I said, you could read them that way and barely notice. You know, that's, like I said, how I've always read these. Because these are not the kinds of things usually that you will find all together in a set. You know, usually you're going to stumble on a few here and a few there. That's how I built up my Doc Savage collection. Just a bit here and a bit there. And I ended up with almost all of them. Which is great, because now I can do this project. And now, like I said, starting in 2025, I'm going to start reading every Doc Savage adventure. It'll take a few years, but they'll be fun years, Roger, full of adventure. So yeah, Doc Savage. So you'll hear me talking more about these books throughout the year. I guess that's all I have to say for tonight, Roger. Catch me. Actually, this is going to go up in the morning. I'm filming it at night, but it'll go up in the morning. And then catch me tomorrow. It should be tomorrow that my weekend reading report makes its return. I'm feeling much better. So I was ill for a short time. So I should have my regularly scheduled stuff up next week. Epic Comic Book Wednesday should return. Book of the Week should return. All that stuff. It'll all be back. It'll just be so exciting. It'll be so exciting. Rogers, he can't wait. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.